Well, welcome to quick quickly prepared seminar to assist TSA workers with concerns that they might have related to creditors and other financial issues that may have arisen. Uh, my name is Marc Dann, and I'm the founding partner of DannLaw, joined today by colleagues Brian Flick, Andy Engel, Jeff Crossman, and Brent Snyder. And we have put together a short presentation to help workers sort out challenges that may arise with creditors and other financial issues during the time that you have been without pay. Understand that paychecks are starting to flow, and we're happy for that. We're embarrassed that our government did not treat the workers like you in the way that they should have. And we thought this was a little something we could do to try to ease the situation. In addition to the information we're sharing today, we've set up an email address of tsahelp@dannlaw.com. So we're happy to answer questions and to, if necessary, step in to represent you on any issues that arose during the government shutdown and during which time you were working hard to protect us. And with that, I'm going to introduce Jeff Crossman, who is going to kind of do the introduction to all this.
Great. Thank you, Mark. As Mark said, we wanted to offer this presentation as a service to those who have been affected by the shutdown, particularly our TSA workers and others who have missed multiple paychecks. But this is information that we utilize every single day in our practice. It's information that is helpful not just to TSA workers who've been through a shutdown, but anybody facing any kind of debt issues. These are practical, very high-level tips, not very legalese, just to give you some information as to how to better deal with situations that could be stressful. So let me, if you go to the next slide there, Brian. Just want to introduce our panel. You've met Marc Dann there in the bottom left-hand corner. He's the principal and founder of DannLaw, a consumer services firm that we do a lot of work in protecting debtors, protecting people from overreaching creditors, predatory lenders. And Mark, as the former Ohio Attorney General, is sort of the tone setter for the entire practice. In addition to that, in the top left-hand corner, you have Brian Flick, nationally recognized bankruptcy attorney, and does a lot in terms of protecting data privacy. And we also have myself, and we have Brent Snyder here as well, who also is very experienced in consumer rights litigation, representing individuals involved in disputes relative to financial institutions. So we want to start by kind of going through, if you'll move to the next slide, Brian, wanted to talk a little bit about, sort of the timeline of credit issues. When you have a credit obligation, you always have a payment due date, and sort of the consequences of things, consequences of not making your payment cascade over time. And so in that, if you miss your payment date, 0 days, if that's probably your payment date. Nothing bad is going to happen if you pay it a day late. 0 to 30 days, you're late, and fees will start to accrue, but you haven't gotten sort of in the window of having issues yet. If you cross that 30-day threshold and you get to 31 days, that's when your late payment is first going to be reported to a credit bureau. So your late mortgage payment, your late credit card bill, that's going to reflect on your credit report. And why that's important is because it definitely influences, your credit history definitely influences how much you pay for future credit, right? So again, 30 days, probably not terribly significant. When you start getting into 30+1, you start getting closer to 60 days to the 90-day window. Now your credit card holder, your Capital Ones, your Chase Bank credit cards, your mortgages, they're going to consider you to be in default, and that carries another set of consequences. And when you get to the 90-day threshold, that's when you're at legal risk, real legal risk of lawsuits, and the debt collectors, if they haven't started calling by 60 days, are certainly starting to call at 90 days. You could switch to the next slide there, Brian. And we certainly see in our practice every day, that when people miss paychecks, the financial situations get more and more difficult for people. And certainly, government shutdowns have been very significant in recent years, but historically, federal government workers have been facing with shutdowns. It's just been more pronounced in recent years, as this slide shows you. Obviously, last fall we had a 43 days of unpaid work in 2025, only to be hit with another 35 plus day shutdown here in this year. And when you start to miss payments, late fees and interest accrues, and that's why we wanted to offer these tips. Brian, if you can move to the next slide for me. So let's talk a little bit about what you do when you get into sort of that 30 to 60 day window, when things are starting to really get hot for you. We're obviously talking about your mortgage. These are your priorities: your mortgage, your landlord, your auto loan, your credit cards, and your cell phone bills. And I would obviously place your mortgage number one. That's your housing, your auto if you need to get to work or to get to the store, get your medicine, you get your doctor's appointments. That's number two. I would say you're probably, utilities and cell phone are equal priority, and then your credit cards are probably last in priority. But the first thing we always recommend a client is to be proactive with your creditors, to call them directly, immediately, when you know you're going to be late, or perhaps you are already late and you're just looking for some options from your creditor to see what you can do to try to stave off some of the bad effects of being late. So most creditors, certainly the better ones, have programs to help you. You can ask for a payment deferral, which means you take your payment that's due, say, next month and move it to the end of the life of the loan. That's called payment deferral. You can ask for a forbearance, just a temporary pause in payments. Or you can ask for a payment plan to take those late payments and put it on the end and maybe make a little bit of payments over time. And you can certainly ask for late fee waivers or penalty waivers. And again, lots of creditors out there will work with you to try to alleviate some of the pressures of your financial situation, because this situation is not caused by anybody in particular. It's a federal shutdown. So I would recommend that if you haven't already and you're in this position, to start calling your creditors directly and be proactive about it. Brian, if you can move to the next slide. Thank you. And so it's just some key tips that you can use when you do call your creditor. First, obviously, you want to describe your income situation as a temporary disruption. It's not something permanent. The creditor needs to have some assurance that they are going to be paid sometime in the future. And certainly, when you talk to your creditors, don't overcommit your position. Don't say, "Well, I'll pay everything that I owe by next week or next month." Give yourself some flexibility, and obviously when you're negotiating anything, you want to start lower than what you want to pay so that you can find somewhere in the middle where you can agree to pay something back in a reasonable time frame. So don't overcommit. And I would say document everything, everybody you talk to, the days you called, the times you called, and certainly a lot of your creditors will record those phone calls, but it's always key to have that information at your fingertips if you need it. And so a lot of times you will get a no. The creditor will say, "No, we don't do that." You're often dealing with sort of a frontline person. It's okay to get a no. Just ask for a supervisor. And sometimes it's as easy as just hanging up and calling back and talking to some other person. So getting a no is common, but it's not the end of the story, and you can keep pushing. Again, you're not asking for any special treatment. You're asking for things that people get every single day. And again, being proactive will inure to your benefit. It shows that you're working on your credit. And a lot of creditors, when I was a state legislator and I was on the Finance Institutions Committee, we heard from lots of bankers and lenders and creditors. And their first thing they would always tell us is, "We like working with customers who are trying to solve their own debt problems." And so they have these programs available to help not only you, but to help them as well. So So that's about being proactive. That kind of sets the table for some of the other things we want to talk about. And now I'll turn it over to my colleague, Brent Snyder, who will talk a little bit about credit reporting.
Thanks, Jeff. That was a good background. I'm Brent Snyder. I'm one of the attorneys with DannLaw, and we'll talk a little bit about credit reports and credit scores and what to do to stay on top of them and what to do when, unfortunately, something bad happens or there's negative or inaccurate reporting. Um, Brian, if you want to go to the first slide. So most people are familiar with credit reports these days. There's a million ads on TV and apps out there to check your credit, whether it's Credit Karma, whatnot. Um, Everybody's pretty familiar that there's three big ones. They're Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Um, there are a litany of other credit reports that people don't generally know about or talk about until they need to know about them or talk about them. And I have those here in a box B. There's actually a 44-page, I found this out myself doing research, a 44-page document that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau puts out that lists every single one of them. And they range from um, credit reports that banks might use to decide whether to let you open an account with them, especially credit unions. Um, if you're renting if you're going to rent an apartment, that verifies your previous rental history, employment ones that might have criminal convictions, or wrongful or terminations based on wrongful acts at work, things like that. The big three though are the ones that are generally used when creditors are making a determination whether or not to extend you credit. Um, and those three, ever since COVID, well, they started it prior to COVID, but since COVID, you've been able to pull one free report from each one of the bureaus once a week. The government set up a website, www.annualcreditreport.com, and that's in the materials here, where you can go and you can access your reports once a week for free. This is not your credit score. This is just your report. Um, the other ones that I mentioned, you have to write in, jump through a bunch of hoops to get those. But obtaining your credit report in any of the big three is a fairly easy, straightforward process. If anybody needs help doing that, we put together a handout that'll walk you through the steps on obtaining those, and then how to save them and whatnot. They do not count as a hard pull. They're not running your credit, so it doesn't affect your score or anything like that. Um, Go on to the next slide, Brian.
And if you want that guide, just email us at tsahelp@danlaw.com and we'll get it for you.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. Or Mark, sorry.
Yeah.
Brent, you said you can get the report for free. Was it free annual? What is the website?
It's www.annualcreditreport.com. And that's in the slides and also the handout that I and some of the other attorneys use to send to clients to pull those reports. Gives a whole walkthrough on how to obtain that, how to save it as a PDF, and then email it to us to review. So your credit report contains what's called trade lines, and that's what the creditor, which in credit reporting language, they're called furnishers. They're furnishing information to the credit reporting agencies. That's what the companies use to come up with your credit score. The most commonly used one is FICO, which stands for Fair Isaac something, after the guy that started it. But there's several other ones, and that's why you'll see fluctuations. Like if you go to Credit Karma and then you go to, say, Experian, you might get a different score because they use different methods of computing. Some of the other models, I think one's True Vantage, and there's a third one I can't remember the name of. But most people really being in the 740 and higher is where you want to be, if at all possible. That'll get you good rates. Generally, after bankruptcy, that's kind of a goal that we try and help people shoot for. But down to a 670, you're still in pretty good shape. Under that, you fall into what's known as subprime, and that's where you're really going to pay really high interest rates. You're not going to get first tier, lenders. Unfortunately, car loans, you're going to get some of the less scrupulous lenders. with not nearly as good terms. So that's why it's important to monitor your credit, not just your score, but the trade lines, because that's what determines your score. And as we've learned over the years, um, all kinds of companies that you wouldn't expect are looking at credit scores as an indication for, say, like auto insurance and what your auto insurance rates are. So it can really affect a lot of aspects in your life, and that's why it's such an issue that some ridiculous percentage of credit reports have at least one, if not more, inaccuracies on them. And we spend a lot of time helping people dispute the reports and get those things corrected, and if necessary, filing lawsuits or litigation to have those things adjusted and corrected if they're not done right. Which kind of brings us to the next slide. Um, so this is basically how your credit works when you're applying for credit. So the creditors, a lot of people have this misconception that when you get a loan, you have to the creditor, the furnisher, has to report it to the credit reporting agencies. They don't. If you borrow money from me, I don't have to report it to the credit bureau. Neither does anybody else. The rule is, however, if they do report it, they have to report it accurately. So, and of course, we want people to have their well, especially their good credit reported to help their scores. Um, but basically, credit is reported for 7 years. Trade line stays on there for 7 years. Bankruptcies are on there for 10. There's some exceptions to some of that. This is kind of in limbo as there's been a lot of fighting in the government and in the courts over medical debt and credit reports, and the laws have changed frequently. But as it stands right now, if you pay off medical debt that's been delinquent, it has to be removed from your credit report. And they have to wait 180 days before reporting it. However, a lot of states, and I don't know Ohio off the top of my head, but a lot of states do not allow medical uh, companies or providers to report to credit reports, and a lot of creditors don't report smaller medical balances. And don't hold me to it, but my understanding is that the calculations that they use for computing credit scores put less weight on medical debt than they do on other consumer type debts, which is important, especially if you're suffering a loss of income, because medical debt is frequently unavoidable, right? I mean, we can not go necessarily charge a TV that we want, but we can't avoid getting sick or getting injured and hurt and having to incur debts to deal with those, or for our family members and whatnot. So when you apply for credit, they have you generally, even in the stores now, it's all electronic, but they have you fill out some information and they run your credit report, and that's what's called a hard pull. And that does affect your score, generally not by a whole lot. It rebounds pretty quickly, but it is a credit check. And if you're approved, well, great. They'll tell you what you're approved for, and you can then utilize that credit. On the other hand, if you're denied, then the creditor has to send you what's called a declination notice, or a decline of credit. And in that notice, they have to tell you why. Um, they don't have to tell you every reason, but they have to tell you what the main reasons were. And they further have to tell you which credit reporting agencies they relied on, your score that they obtained from that agency, and that you have the right to get a copy of that report. Um, that's probably not as important now as it used to be um, when you couldn't just easily pull your credit reports weekly. But nonetheless, if you do get denied credit and you're surprised, or it comes back and there's something on there that it says and it doesn't make any sense to you, you have a right to know why that is, and to see that on paper, and then possibly dispute it if necessary. Um, so that's why obviously it's important to monitor your credit before you apply for any kind of credit line. But if you do get denied, it's important to know why you got denied and make sure it wasn't for an improper reason. Um, Okay, you can go next slide, Ryan. Oh, thanks, you already did. Sorry. All right, so here's where we get into the nitty gritty. Let's say you do pull your credit and something's not accurate on there. There's several problems with credit reports. There's either inaccurate reporting, there's duplicative reporting, there's what's called mixed files, which unfortunately we see a lot with family members. Mixed file is where two people's credit report gets mixed up. It also happens with identity theft type cases. It's not uncommon. I've seen it a lot over the years that Joe Smith Sr. and Joe Smith Jr. or second, um, their credit reports get mixed up with each other, and all of a sudden, the father owes for the son that is being reported for the son's debt, and vice versa. It's a very common problem, and um, can take some work to get undone. So generally, this is the steps to dispute your credit. However, we for the TSA and for lots of other people that are struggling, we are more than happy to review your credit reports, and then we can help you draft disputes, simply because we know the right terminology to use. The credit reporting agencies really want people to send in very specific disputes, not just blanket, I don't owe this, but what happened here? I that's not me, or this was an identity theft, um, or that charge was reversed, or something, to that effect. The payment was made on time, but they credited it late. Any of those type issues. You can do disputes online, which we generally don't suggest for a number of reasons, mostly because they don't have nearly as good of records. And there's some other legal kind of catches that go in there with being subject to arbitration and whatnot if you file that way. So we generally do them by certified mail. You can also do them by phone, but I guess again that's uh, not as good as having a paper trail.
Why is having a paper trail important, Brent?
Well, because we want to have it documented that you submitted a report that was very thorough, and that'll get up to step 3 here. Why you want to do that? Have a thorough report, so that you can show, if necessary, if you get to the point that you need to be in litigation and suing a creditor or even the credit bureaus, that you did what you were supposed to, that you sent in the proper information, that you sent in a copy of the identity theft police report, or I had one recently where there was a company that acknowledged my client was the victim of identity theft, told him he wouldn't owe it, and somehow it ended up with the debt collector, and we filed disputes to the debt collector and the credit reporting agency, and they just came back and said it was accurate, and we're like, no, we sent you the paper from the original creditor saying it was identity theft and not him. Which goes to the next part. So once you dispute it, the credit reporting agency has 5 days, and they do it electronically. They transmit it to the furnisher, who then gets generally 30 days, but usually 45, because if you pull your credit from annualcreditreport.com, which is normally what we suggest, they get 45 days to respond. But more importantly, they have to respond. If they don't within that time period, the credit reporting agencies have to remove it. However, the credit reporting agencies have the duty to conduct their own investigation. And Jeff, this goes to your question, is that very, very frequently, and this has been a problem, and it's a growing problem, especially given the current administration, there's been way more credit disputes, way more credit inaccuracies, and way more credit corrections, if you will, that the bureaus have to look at it as well. So the case I was just talking about, where we sent in proof from the original creditor that this was an identity theft matter, the debt collector just wrote back and said, no, it's accurate. And the credit reporting agencies just said, yep, it's accurate. They said so. And so they're getting sued because it obviously wasn't, because we sent in documented materials showing that it was an identity theft situation. So they're not allowed to just accept the furnisher's word. But if you just write in and say, hey, I dispute it, it's not right, and the creditor says, yes, it's right, then you don't have any leg to stand on, except for the fact that you can do a new reinvestigation. You can send in new evidence, which gives them a little bit longer as well. To then they're supposed to then reinvestigate that and come back. Um, Importantly, even if it's disputed and they deny your dispute and you still think it's wrong, you have the right to have up to 100-word statement added to that trade line that says why it's inaccurate, or something that says I was 2 weeks late because I was out of work for 2 weeks, and then I made up the payment. Now, that doesn't mean that the reporting is inaccurate, but it at least helps when somebody looks at your credit report and can see this is what the issue was.
Well,
Um,
and Brent, would it make sense to mention that they were caught up in the government shutdown as the
yeah.
reason
Oh,
that they were out
yeah.
of work? Because I think that will evoke some consideration from creditors in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. And I think, that's important, especially with bigger loans, especially mortgages, right? Because mortgages with underwriting, the mortgage originators and lenders, they have the ability to go beyond just pulling the score and seeing if you check their various boxes. They can actually sit there and go through the report and see, if there was some kind of, unforeseen circumstance, or, blip, rather than a consistent history and pattern of being delinquent in debts and whatnot. Um, Credit discrimination is illegal. There's a list of the normal protected type classes that you can't be discriminated against. And and then also is again what happens if you're denied credit. Now, if you're denied credit for one of these protected class reasons, that's normally hard to find, but we do see it on occasion. Um, let's see what else we got here.
I
So
think it's
that's
back. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. When you're
oh, go
done, I
ahead,
think
Jeff.
it's back.
Oh, go
It's
ahead.
back to me when you're done. So,
Oh, okay. I was going to say, so here's the takeaways. Basically, check your credit often. Um, if you have questions about it, if you don't understand it, because some of them are like reading algebra. I swear, it's taken me a long time to grasp understanding of them and what it means. They use a lot of codes and things like that. But we're happy to help. We're happy to explain things and look at them, and see what we can do to help them get fixed if necessary. Um, the Our phone number's on there. Mark said there's an email as well. And we'd be happy to talk with you more about it if needed.
actually, it's Marc Dann is actually up. We'll talk about debt settlement companies.